So on slide 4, how and when will OLED lighting succeed in the marketplace? Obviously enough. We're going to be looking a lot at pricing because I think that's a big deal. And product strategy is also a big deal. And really, although there's actually a lot of applications areas that OLED lighting can go into, we're going to be talking about backlighting and general illumination and where the sweet spots are in those areas. And of course, what challenges and uncertainties still remain. And then a sort of umbrella issue that will be coming up all the time is OLEDs versus high brightness LEDs, those two being the key areas of solid state lighting that look like they're going to come to the fore. So although I'm not going to talk about those in any particular order, those are the topics that are going to be coming up throughout the next 30 or so minutes. Moving on to slide 5, here is the generic market researchers graph, which shows that the market's going to continue upwards, onwards and upwards, and it all looks very impressive. I want to make a few points, though. First of all, the initial burst of growth is essentially exponential and almost always is. It's just a mathematical issue. When you're starting from nothing, you get exponential growth quite easily. And then around about 2012, 2013, you start to get the regulations essentially forcing incandescent bulbs, not completely, but mostly out of the market, and then you see some very fast growth. And then it begins to steady up as pricing begins to come down, become more reasonable, volumes go up, but overall the revenue growth begins to stabilize, and that's pretty standard. Two things, and again, things that will come up throughout this. We show fairly large market by the time we get to 2016. Obviously, that depends on prices. I'll be talking about that in a minute, too. But prices are very uncertain at the moment. As you'll see, pricing policy for incandescent bulbs doesn't easily translate into these new kinds of solid-state bulbs for a number of reasons. And the other thing I want to say, and maybe we can come back and talk about this in question time if anybody wants to talk about it, but one of the things that is likely to happen, what really is happening, is that essentially regulation is pushing this market. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen anyway, but it's certainly pushing, regulation pushing incandescent bulbs out of the market creates a hole that solid-state lighting will fall into, creating very rapid growth at first. So where are we today? Just, we talked about the exciting things in the future. First of all, Rob had said, we've been doing this area for quite a long time, 4 years or so. We sort of came to this the way the industry did. It was OLED lighting a few years ago was kind of tagged on to the display industry. People became more interested in it, I think in part because there was a groundswell of interest in lighting when it was discovered that you didn't need active matrices for lighting, and active matrices were found to be very hard to construct for OLED. So it seemed like a simpler way to go in some ways. So I think this is the first year that at least we haven't really thought of the OLED lighting industry as being somewhat tacked on to the display industry, with it, and that it now has its own rules. And of course, it has its own participants, and as we'll see later, some of the major lighting companies are now interested in it for its own sake, not just because it's an easier way of going with OLED technology, an easier application to apply than some displays. I suppose the other thing in the display industry is that the hope was to build very large OLED displays, and that hasn't really gone that well this year because the number of people who wanted to buy a $5,000 television set, as it were, is very limited for obvious reasons. And this year has also been different because we've really seen the first products. You actually can buy OLED lighting now, admittedly at very high pricing, and if you've been around the lighting shows, you'll see everybody and his brother and sister have demos of OLED lighting, not necessarily things you can buy yet. and they do have a strange similarity to each other, but clearly this is the first year that there's something out there that's actually a lamp, not an R&D experiment. One thing that's significant from that was a few years ago, I think people were thinking that the way into this might be through novelties and just novel little products and things, and that doesn't seem to be the case. What does seem to be taking off is some fairly sophisticated lighting products, and we think perhaps early development of certain kinds of backlighting. But what did happen this year, of course, was the recession, and that affected all of us. And the impact on OLEDs, I think, was that clearly not, I mean, people had less money to spend. Certainly venture capital firms had less money to spend. And when you see the list of companies that are in there, you see that a lot of them are very big companies. And I think there would have been more startups around, and there will be in future, but this year wasn't the year for it. Slump in new housing and the whole slump in construction and all the things that go around it has certainly discouraged people to put money in this space, because OLED lighting going into homes is, again, just not that much money around. Perhaps the most interesting topic on that list, I think, is lower energy prices. OLED lighting has been pitched as an environmental advantage and also as a way of saving money, operations costs on lighting. That may or may not be true. Lower energy prices have certainly been characteristic of the last year, but we think that probably that's a blip in the market long term. First of all, monetary policies, and certainly in this country and probably in Europe, suggest that we're going to see some inflationary pressures on commodities and therefore on energy. So we'll be back perhaps where we were 2 years ago. And in addition, whether you leaving outside the monetary economics of this, there's still the ongoing growth of India and China, which seems unstoppable and will put enormous pressure on energy demand. And so there'll be huge incentives to create more energy efficient lighting and energy efficient everything else as well. But we've still got a long way to go on where we want to be with organic LEDs. And on slide 7, you'll see kind of a comparison of the major technologies